Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of gouletpens.com, and it's episode number 250 of Goulet Q&A. And if I got a big day planned for you, not really. I had planned on maybe doing something special for 250, but I've had the last couple of weeks off, which you could look from the outside and say, hey, you had all this time to plan things. But no, not so much. My kids had spring break, which multiple children plus Rachel got sick. And then we had our refrigerator die, and we had to replace all of our food. And then we had a business trip, lots of other things going on. And now this week is Holy Week. We are Catholic, which means it's just, we're basically living in church this week. So there's just a lot going on, and I'm, despite the best of intentions, I was thinking maybe I'll fill the room with like 250 balloons or something, and no, just didn't have anything. But anyway, we did try moving the camera forward a little bit, so hopefully I can show you pens close up better. That's something, right? Anyway, I'm doing my best, but appreciate you hanging in there with me. Can't believe it's been 250 of these things. It has been almost 6 years this August since we started first doing Q&A. Kind of crazy. So the fact that we're still doing it is a feat in and of itself. But anyway, got some fun stuff to talk about this week. Last couple of weeks, so I had the spring break thing. I talked about the fridge. The business trip we went on was to Charleston. It was not like a pen-related thing. I didn't arrange a meetup or anything because our time was too tight. But basically, we went to an e-commerce conference. I actually spoke at the conference about producing video and content and why it's good to kind of share, personal connection with your, customers. Which is, apparently a revolutionary concept to a lot of folks. So got to talk a little bit about that, talk about the pen world and how awesome the pen community is. So that was pretty cool. To a bunch of other like e-commerce folk. So that was pretty cool. We've had a bunch of new products coming in because it's been a few weeks. The biggest thing that we've had coming in is the Lamy Safari Pastel. I don't know if that's officially named the pastel, but they look pastel, so that's what we're calling them. But anyway, there is the mint glaze, powder rose, and the blue macaron. And they look a little less vibrant than some of the marketing materials I've seen like coming directly from Lamy. It's always tough to color correct, but anyway, they are like truly pastel. I really feel like that is an accurate description of them. First time they've come out with 3 special editions at once. So like previous special editions, I would expect them to be around for 9 months to a year, and then they'll be gone. So they're either going back to the shiny. They've had matte finishes the last 3 years. So for those of you who were kind of sick of matte, now we're back to shiny. And it's just, it's a Lamy Safari. Extra fine, and medium nibs. You can swap out broad or stub nibs with them if you already have other Lamys in your collection. But yeah, so overall really good colors. Rachel and I talked about these in Right Now on Wednesday. If you want to get a little more detail, and we show the whole collection that I have of different safaris. But really nice looking colors, not necessarily like, oh yeah, pastel speaks to my heart kind of thing for me personally. But they are really attractive colors, especially if you're into the pastel thing. I think you'll be really, really pleased. I do feel like they are named true to color, which I know has not necessarily been the consensus in years past with some of the colors, but I think they're pretty good. So I think you'll like them. Anyway, so we have those this week. Hopefully, I'm shooting this on a Wednesday. They're supposed to arrive on Thursday. Hopefully by the time you see this, all has gone smoothly. We're not expecting to like sell out in hours or anything. No matching ink. But it's just the pens. We also have exclusive pen that we designed with Bennu in Russia, and this is the hexagon format. So this is a very cool pen. It's not unlike some of the layouts that they have on some of their other hexagons, but we went with some custom colors. So obviously blue and purple are 2 of our favorite things. Blue's my favorite color. Rachel loves purple. On the blue, though, it's sort of a translucent blue, and it is luminescent, so that it'll actually glow in the dark. And then, of course, it's got a deep purple, and then it's got these big kind of chunks of reflective, glittery stuff. So you can see right there just how big those glitter things are. It's not just like tiny little, it's more like confetti than it is like glitter. And then the nib itself is going to be a number 5 size Jowo nib. Nice writing pens. Schmidt nib, not Jowo. Schmidt nibs, so you can check those things out. Steel nibs, nice writing pens. Check them out. We are only going to have a limited run, just 1 run of them, and then they're going to be gone. So we got those. We also got, this came in, Drew talked about this a little bit, but the Coeco Supra in brass. It's basically a big Lilliput. The Lilliput that I have personally is the fire blue, which is a little bit tempered in its color because I've run it through the washing machine, which apparently dulls the color a little bit, so don't do that. I did it accidentally. But anyway, it's a big version of that. Very cool. The thing I like about the Supra is it is number 6 size nib, which is awesome. They're using UFO nibs on these things. And what's cool about this is you can actually, it's kind of convertible. So you can use a full-size converter with the spacer in the middle, or you can take the spacer out and you can have a shorter version of the pen if you get the cartridge out there from being backwards. And then it's the same length, basically, as the Lilliput. So that's pretty cool. If you still want it to be a really, really short pocket pen and you're cool with having a cartridge only, you can do that. Or you can have the longer version and use your converter with a number 6 nib with a solid brass, which is pretty cool. And it's going to patina over time a little bit. It's going to wear and tear, and you know, you'll carry it around and scratch it up and make it look beautiful, like it's your own, like you've actually been using it. That's what I love about raw metal pens. So that's cool. We got those now. What else we got? The Montegrappa Mini Mule. Talked about those on Monday in Right Now. So if you want to learn more about those, you can do it. I didn't want to get it back out and have to polish it off and everything. So you can check out the video there since we already did one on it. We had the Conklin Duraflex Sunstones, which I don't know if they're still going to be around by the time this video films or not. If not, then I'm sorry. But if so, you should go get one now because they're not going to be around very long. So it's kind of like a tortoise color, like a brown tortoisey color with rose gold trim, Omniflex nib. And apparently they did some kind of adjustment to these Omniflexes to where they should be more reliable. So anyway, always trying to tweak and make improvements on that. You can check those out on our site if we have them. And then we also have the Conklin Duragraph Turquoise, which is an individually numbered pen out of 1898. We've had these before, haven't had them for several months, brought it back, and now we have it again. So if you've been interested in one of those, you can check them out. We're gonna probably have them for a little bit, but not forever, because this may be, I'm not sure how many more we're getting, but this may be the final batch, I'm not sure. Also, Aurora is coming out with a series of 100th anniversary pens because it is their 100th anniversary this year. So they're calling all the series Cento. I think they're coming out with like 10 different pens or something like that. I forget the exact number, but it's going to be all different models, different colors and stuff like that. They haven't released what all of them are yet, but they have the first one out, which is the Edo, which is a model of pen that we haven't ever had before. There you go, kind of your typical nicer Aurora box. Here is the Edo pen, and from what I understand, what makes this pen special from other Edos they've had is they have the red accents. That's what makes it the Cento. So it is pull. It's got a little smaller nib on it, and this is a, what nib is this? 14 karat. It's similar in size to what you would see on the Ypsilon. It's not exactly the same as the Ypsilon, but something along those lines. Cartridge converter comes with. Yeah, so you can check those out. You're looking in the hundreds of dollars for these because it is a gold nib and it is out of 100 of them. So they're only doing 100, hence the Cento. There's not going to be a whole ton of them. We don't have very many, just a handful, but they are here. And if you're a big Aurora fan, it's not often they come out with a lot of crazy new stuff, but they're kind of going all out for the 100th, which is pretty neat. Pretty neat to see. What else have we got? Let's see here. The Diplomat is the other thing that is new that has come in. So we have the Diplomat Excellence A2s, and these are called the Oxide finish, O-X-Y-D. It's pronounced Oxide, as opposed to the scientific spelling of that, which would be O-X-I-D-E. It's kind of a little flair, a little fun thing they're doing there. And they have two different versions. They have a brass one and an iron. Now, I don't know if these are actually made of brass and iron. Particularly, that's just the color that they're calling them. But anyway, UFO nibs, number 6, cartridge converter, standard international, good stuff. You know, Diplomat stuff is really, really solid. But it's the finish that makes these things really cool. So you can see the finishes on these are pretty rad, and they're very smooth. You know, they look almost like a brushed metal finish. I don't know if it's a patinaed finish or a lacquered or what they have going on here, but it is pretty neat, and I haven't really seen it before. I don't know if it's a chemical thing. I'm going to try and learn more about this finish, but it's a relatively new thing. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it is new from Diplomat, and that's kind of interesting, so we thought we would pick those up, and I almost dropped them. There we go. We're okay. Last but not least, coming soon, we have the TWSBI Eco in transparent orange. which if you're a fan of the Eco, we've had lots of other transparent colors. The blue is my personal favorite, but that's because I'm a sucker for all things blue. Clearly, new blue shirt, yay. Anyway, so that is going to be coming, I think, next week. I think next week is the plan for the TWSBI Eco Transparent Orange. There's a bunch of other new stuff that's on the docket, but everything that we're looking at on our shipment schedule all has question marks by it. So I'm like, I'm not going to talk about it in Q&A yet because it is still rather questionable. All right, so I have a bunch of questions this week. I think I have 8 questions, so I'm gonna roll through. Okay, so let's start out. We got some pen and writing questions. This is from Radical X Edward on Twitter. I have similar issues with oily hands and small / smooth / tapered pens as Brian does. What are his recommendations for budget sub $50 fountain pens with grips that he likes? Okay, you know, when you're talking sub $50, I do have to make some somewhat special considerations just because there's not a whole ton of sub $50 pens that are extremely large. They tend to be a little bit on the thinner side. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just that's how they design them or what, but most of the bigger pens tend to be a little more expensive. C'est la vie. So first one that I had this on my list. I ended up kind of taking off at the last minute. I'll just give it a casual mention. The Diplomat Magnum, it is kind of a thin grip. So it's going to be good for people with smaller hands. I do love the pen. The grip is a bit small for me, but it is pretty comfortable. It's on the thin side, so it's worth a kind of an honorable mention. TWSBI has a lot of really good options here. The Go, the Eco, 580. There's a bunch of different pens that have very pleasurable grips that I find rather comfortable. I use TWSBIs on a pretty regular basis. Some of them have a slight triangular thing going on, but nothing too much to where it makes it really kind of pinchy when you go to hold it. So I'm a big fan of all those. The Eco ends up being a little more of my go-to, partly just because I like the colors and the taper, and it's a pretty low maintenance pen, and it's relatively affordable. So I like that one, but I'm really just, I love all the TWSBIs. They all kind of fit. I got the 580 all. Technically, it kind of falls outside your $50 thing, but that's what I grabbed, and I like the color. So anyway, if you get the regular clear 580, that falls in your $50 thing. Well, I guess technically sub $50 wouldn't include $50, would it? So maybe just take the 580 out of there, but whatever. You still got some other TWSBI options. Kaweco, their Perkeo is actually pretty decent. It's not a pen that gets a whole ton of love, but I think it's really kind of an underrated pen. It's a good size. The length is really good. I have bigger hands, so I like it. The grip, it's a plastic grip. It's got a little bit of a triangular thing going on here, but it's got just a slightest bit of a matte finish to it. So it actually gives you a surprisingly good grip on the pen. And it doesn't have any threads or anything, so you can hold it farther back and it doesn't impede. I really think this is kind of an underrated pen. So Perkeo gets a thumbs up in my book. What else we got here? Jinhao, I think there's a couple different contenders here. Now you're into some heavier metal pens here. Even though they're metal, they have a kind of a coated grip. This is on the 750. The 450 has a plastic grip, which also has pretty good grip, and it's even got little grooves with a little bit of a triangular indentation on it. So these pens, you're in like the $10 range. Really affordable pens, big size nib, pretty decent size grip, heavier pens, so maybe not for everybody, but pretty popular starter pen here with Jinhao, so I think that's worthwhile. And then just kind of a casual mention for Jinhao, the Jinhao Shark as well. Now this one's interesting because you really can't grip it very close up to the front here, but it's a pretty hooded nib, so really you hold it back here on the ink window is really where it is, and it's got a triangular indentation here. So it actually ends up working pretty well, even for somewhat larger hands like me, because I tend to hold my pens a little further back. Now it does get a little short on the end. You can post it though. It ends up being okay, and then your shark is kind of looking at you, and that might weird you out. So that might be the only consideration we had there. But it's such a cheap pen. It's $4. Really fun, lots of different colors. Huge plus for the shark. My kids love the Jinhao Sharks. Not surprisingly. Lamy Safari, Lamy All-Star needs to get an honorable mention in here too. Where are they? That's right. I have the Safaris right over here that I showed you earlier. You know, these have a little more prominent triangular grip, but they've got a little bit of an edge to them, which to me helps it grip a little better. The plastic, it's a little bit slick, but the matte versions especially, you get a really good grip on them. Even though it's the plastic on there, it's got nice rounded kind of indentations toward the end, so it's not going to slip down and slip out of your hands. You're going to be able to lock your hands in there and get a good grip on it. So, you know, of course, the reliability of Lamy is pretty darn good. So that one gets a huge plus from me. Another really affordable one is the Platinum Preppy. Nice rounded grip, nothing crazy going on with a taper, no triangularness going on. It's just a plastic round grip that's pretty decent size. You know, it's about a good mid-size grip for me. The body's pretty long, so you don't have to post, but you can if you want to. Even though it's a little bit longer, it's got a nice light cap, so it doesn't throw the weight off. Super reliable pen, great to just like throw it around in your car, your bag or purse or whatever. Always a reliable pen. You can eyedropper convert it. Lots of good stuff going on there. And then Pilot has some good options too. Now, the Metropolitan, I love this pen, but it does have a little more of a taper and it's a bit on the thin side. So I tend to like the Metropolitan for quick notes and things like that. I don't love it as much for long journaling sessions. It's great for quick writers because it's a snap cap. You can carry it around. It's durable. It's metal. The clip is strong, and it performs really well. It's got a very fine nib, especially on the fine. So it's really good for a carry-around pen if you're going, like I'm going to a work conference or something like that. I don't know what kind of paper I'm going to be using. I can have that fine nib and it's nice and reliable there. So that's a good one to have, even though the grip itself is not like the main selling feature for me. But some other ones that I do like the grips a little bit better from Pilot is the Kakuno. So the grip is a little bit fatter. It's got a little bit of a triangular thing going on and not as heavy as a taper. So same nib as what you're going to have on a Metropolitan, a little bit lighter body pen, more affordable. So the Kakuno again is kind of a sleeper as well to me, just like the Perkeo is. I think it kind of fits in that same category. And then the Pilot Explorer is a newer pen that came out maybe 6 months ago. Not gotten a whole ton of attention. Super, super light pen, some interesting colors, and has a grip that has a similar taper to a Metropolitan, but it's not quite as thin. Let me look at a comparison. It's just a little bit thicker. Just a little bit thicker, but the pen's really light, so you don't have to grip it very hard. And it's got a decent grip to it. So Explorer as well gets some love from me. So there you go, bunch of different pens for you, different grip options. You know, I'm a big fan of pens in this price range. I think you can have a really good writing experience with any of these. Yeah, and that's me with my perspective and my weird big monkey hands. Okay, next question we have is from cat.jeanie on Instagram. Between the TWSBI Eco and the 700R, which do you think is easier to disassemble? Which is sturdier and least likely to crack? Okay, so I'm just checking my audio. We're good. Okay, so TWSBI Eco and 700R. So you're talking about two relatively affordable pens. One is a piston version on the Eco, and one is a vacuum filler on your VAC 700. Okay, overall construction is going to be really good on both of these. To me, I think you have more of a possibility for cracking to have on the 580. Just because of the way it's constructed, you got this diamond faceted pattern. I don't know that much about like plastic and tension and all this kind of stuff, but I know there are more stress points when you have more of like a faceted design kind of thing. Or there's more of a tensity, more of a possibility for that. TWSBI's done a really good job to address that. I really don't hear about cracking very often. I know it can happen, and TWSBI's really good about addressing that kind of thing if you do TWSBIinc@gmail.com. That's TWSBIinc@gmail.com. They're really good at handling that kind of thing. But anyway, so we're talking about the Eco and the VAC 700 here. So if you're talking about pure disassembly, I'm going to read your question very literally here. It's basically the same, because it's the same action. All you gotta do is unscrew the knob. You know, okay, yes, you can pull this one out of the way, but you can just unscrew it like that. You're gonna have your wrench, your TWSBI wrench. This is the metal one that comes with your VAC 700R or your 580 or your Mini or whatever. And you're gonna screw it counterclockwise, you know, on the back. But I usually like to hold on to the wrench and then unscrew the body, just because it's a little easier to control. The wrench like flies off and drops on your lap and everything. And then you unscrew it and then you just pull it out. It's pretty straightforward, pretty hard to screw up the VAC 700R. The Eco, on the other hand, when you actually disassemble it, there's a few more parts to it. Which way am I going with it? And see, this one disassembles clockwise. So it's the opposite of the VAC 700R. That's why I had to remember which one it was. So there you go. Now this one, you can unscrew it here. You can have the piston apart from it. You can take this piston mechanism apart in multiple ways, and people get in a lot of trouble. So I think in terms of disassembly, they're identical, but in terms of reassembly, the VAC 700 is definitely the easier one to do, because you really can't screw it up unless you are trying to like alter it or modify it or something like that. Because the VAC 700, it's on this contained rod. You can take the O-ring off, but other than that, you're really not supposed to disassemble any part of the mechanism itself. So you pretty much just shove it back in, stick it on, and then screw it in, and it works again. So a little easier to maintain the VAC 700R than any of the piston filling TWSBIs, and that's pretty much how that works. As far as which is sturdier and least likely to crack, I think these two are really pretty much the same. I haven't really seen a lot of issues with either of these as much, so I think they're pretty much going to be level. I think you're just going to go with whichever one is more in your budget, because you're looking 65-ish range, 30-ish range here. So it's about twice the price for the VAC over the Eco. So you could get 2 Ecos for the price of a VAC if you're so inclined, but the VAC is pretty dang cool. It's the most affordable VAC that I'm aware of. So there you go. You got some options from TWSBI, both of them reliable pens. Cool. All right. Peterbhay on Instagram asks, why are 90% of the pens the same length? Did the length of shirt pockets dictate pen length? Really want this riddle solved. I don't know if it's really a riddle, but I'm no riddle magician, riddle scientist here. I don't even know what the term is there. I'm no riddle aficionado. But to me, it's not really a riddle. I think it's just you're dealing with pens. They've been around for 150 or more years, and it really it's largely been determined by what is most universally practical for people to carry around. So maybe shirt pockets are a factor. I don't have very many shirts with pockets in them. I don't really carry them around, so that's not really a factor for me ever, is carrying it in a shirt pocket. But I think a lot of it has to do with the size of people's hands. That probably is more important than the shirt pocket, because I think honestly shirts pockets are made to accommodate whatever people are putting in them. So if everyone in the world loved to carry 12-inch long pens and put them in their shirt pocket, then people would probably make shirt pockets that were 12 inches long, or whatever length it was needed to be. That would look pretty funny, wouldn't it? Having like a large pocket, be more like a sheath for your pen. But anyway, there are some like custom pen makers and stuff that have made pens that are really, really long, but they get to be a little bit unwieldy. You know, just pulling out some of the pens that I had here on my desk, I was like, really, 90%? I mean, I don't know if that's a scientific number that you came up with or if you just kind of guessed. You're probably about right. They're not the exact same length, but I think most pens tend to be around that 5.5-inch long length when they're closed. The lengths will vary a little bit more depending on if they're posted or not. But in general, yeah, I found that most of my pens tend to be around 5.5 inches long, maybe up to 6, maybe down to 5, 5.25, something like that. But you don't really see a lot longer than 6 inches because they start to get pretty long. You know, the one exception would be you have a calligraphy pen like the Donna J. This is 7 inches long, and even though it's only 1 inch, like difference between, you know, well, this isn't quite 6 inches long. I'm trying to find even what is actually 6 inches long. I have my little measuring device here. So let's see here. I know this is 7 because I measured it. Homo sapiens is a pretty good length of pen. Let me see how long this sucker is. It's about 5 3/4 inches long. Jinhouse Shark, that looks about 6 inches long. Yeah, there we go. That's about 6 inches long. So even the Jinhouse Shark, slightly longer than most pens compared to like a TWSBI Eco. You know, it's gonna be a little bit longer than that. And then you have your Donna J, which is gonna be even longer. But just look how much longer that looks. Even though you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, like 5.5 inches versus 7 inches. It doesn't seem like that much of a difference, but it really feels like quite a difference in your hand. Especially when you post it, it's like, wow, Harry Potter wand action going on here in your hand. So I think a lot of it has to do with just what's practical for people in their hands, especially if you have something that's got a little bit of a weight to it. If you got metal pens that get really long, they get really, really back heavy. So I think it has to do with your, I'm not a hand scientist. I'm just making up all kinds of scientists today. I'm not a hand scientist, but if I was, I would probably measure about the size of most people's hands where they hold a pen and the length between the tip of the nib and where it rests on the hand here, because right there is kind of probably going to be a very important crux point, because when you get too far out here, the leverage you're going to get is going to start to make it uncomfortable for you to write. You want most of your weight to be kind of downward here, so you're not having to like pull your pen down to the paper to lift it. That's a little bit of an unnatural position. So I think that's what has a lot to do with it, is size of people's hands. So if everybody had much bigger hands, you'd probably see much longer pens. That would be my guess. But anyway, that's my theory, not to be proven at all, because I don't think anybody's going around measuring people's hand sizes for pen lengths. I think what you're seeing is most pens are about the same size because, they're about the same length because that's what people buy. Because if you get too far outside of what is universally appealing to most people, then you kind of fall on the fringes. Your pen's going to be more obscure, not as popular, not as mainstream, and you won't sell as many. So most pen companies end up kind of sticking towards the universal sizes that tend to be most popular. And it's not a conspiracy, it's not a riddle. I think it's just capitalism. Okay, Ashley Beck 718 on Instagram. What fountain pen would you recommend for cycle touring or commuting stored in a pannier? So that's like one of those like saddlebags on the side of your bicycle. I've honestly never ridden a bike with a pannier. I've never ridden a bike and taken a fountain pen with me. Now that I think about it, I've done a lot of cycling, but I've never like cycled somewhere with a pen to do any type of writing. Usually when I cycle, it's like for exercise, and I'm like going out working my lungs and muscles as hard as I can, trying to get back, and then got to shower and do kid stuff. That's usually my routine. So I think honestly you could probably use just most anything. There's some considerations to be had depending on how long you're riding and stuff like that, but generally speaking, I'd say you probably want something, kind of durable. You don't want to have some really expensive, really fragile pen, so going with something a little bit simpler. Weight may be a factor, but the weight of your pen is not going to be very significant in the grand scheme of things, unless you're just really trying to pack light. And then you go with a more of a plastic pen instead of a metal if you're trying to save an ounce here or there. I think something more of like a workhorse pen. Lamy Safari comes to mind. A lot of people use these as kind of workhorse pens. I know people that literally they're miners, or they're in the military wearing uniforms and stuff. They like these pens because they're durable and they hold up and they're very reliable. So that's one. TWSBI Go, pretty practical, pretty affordable. And you can toss it around. You're really not going to break this plastic very easily, so that's a good one. TWSBI Eco could be another contender. The only thing against these, when you get to really large ink capacities and you're jostling pen around, or you're out there in the elements and the sun's beating down on you, that kind of thing, you can have more of a tendency for ink to come out of the nib and splatter inside the cap and stuff like that. If you stick with cartridge converter pens or cartridges, you're going to have less of that because the ink capacity is smaller, so you're not going to have as much air inside the pen to react to temperature and pressure changes, and it's not going to be sloshing around quite as much and flinging out of the pen. So not to say that cartridge converter pens can't leak in the cap. You just see that more the higher ink capacity you go. So especially if you have a large pen with an eyedropper conversion, that kind of thing, you're going to see more leakage into the cap. I think the Diplomat Magnum could be a good one. That's pretty small, pretty reasonable one, cartridge pen. Traveler's pen, that's a little brass pen, which I normally have on me, but I left at home because I need to clean it. Kaweco Lilliput or Supra could be a good one to go. Just some solid metal pen that could be really durable. Those could work. Something along those lines. So I'd probably stick with those cartridge converters, less likely to leak and stuff like that. But there you go. That's what I think is going to work. But I really don't think you're limited too much. It just has to do with if you happen to lose it or happen to drop it when you're on the road, you wouldn't be too traumatized. So stick with something maybe a little bit on the affordable range that you can beat up a little bit, and you'll be in good shape. Cool. Matthew W. on Facebook says, I think a lot of beginner fountain pen users start with fine and extra fine nibs because they are working with lousy paper. I know I did, but now I'm fascinated by ink and I'd love to buy some broad nibs. Do you or Broad Queen Rachel, I like that term, have specific recommendations for makes and models that have great broad nibs? Yes, we do have some recommendations. I did ask Broad Queen Rachel. I'm gonna have to call her that now. She will hate it. Maybe not though, because she does love broads. I don't call her Queen though. That just sounds funny. Anyway, so Rachel tends to gravitate towards, I asked her, and I was like, you know, what are your favorites? I had to kind of guess, and I guess mostly right, but TWSBI broads, she's a big fan of those. Pilot Vanishing Point broad, she loves those. But honestly, she says the favorite broads are actually the Pelikan M600, which she usually, pretty much every Pelikan Special Edition M600 that comes out, she buys. Like that lavender one that's coming out soon, yeah, she's gonna get that. It's not here yet, but it's coming. That purple and white, yeah, she's getting that. So those tend to be her go-tos. I actually, you know, when I do broads, I don't, you know, I tend to go more with steel. I don't know why, but just a lot of the ones happen to be my favorite there. So I'm a big fan of Jowo steel nibs. Obviously, that's what Goulet nibs are. So yeah, Goulet broad nibs. I have that a Conklin Endura in ebony and with a broad nib that I've been using like crazy. I have big fan of Montegrappa Elmo, Opus 88, you know, demonstrator. That one I've got in a broad. That works really well. Coeco Super on brass. That one I actually have a double broad because it was a mistake. I didn't even know they had a double broad, but they accidentally sent us one instead of a broad. And rather than send it back, I was like, let me keep that one. So I don't know if you're super interested in that. It's technically an option. We didn't think it would be that universally appealing, so we didn't want to stock them. But anyway, they do exist apparently. What else we got? The Edison broads are really good, also Jowo. TWSBI VAC 700R, also Jowo. And Diplomat Aero, also Jowo. Basically, Jowo number 6 broads are kind of my thing. But I'm also a big fan of the Lamy 2000 broad. Pretty much anything Pilot are really good. Their broads are good. Yeah, and so I think those would tend to be my favorites. But I also like all the ones that Rachel mentioned too. I was just trying to give you some different ones. Donna J on Facebook says, if a person lives in an area where hands-on trying the next and higher level of fountain pens at a pen show or a brick and mortar store isn't an option, what recommendations would you have to give? What recommendations would you give to help that person take the leap? I get it. You know, this was tough for me when I first started out. I had the advantage of being in the pen business, which not everybody has. So, you know, basically research. Do a lot of online research, ask people in the community. There's Goulet Nation, there's, you know, lots of forums, blogs, those types of things. So you can interact on social media, Instagram, Facebook, all these places. You'll get a lot of different answers from people, but they'll probably be honest with you. See if there's a local pen meetup or maybe start one, you know, reach out to you know, a Fountain Pen Network, Goulet Nation, something like that, and say, hey, I live in the Des Moines area. Does anybody here want to get together and talk about pens? Maybe bring your pens, I want to try some. Cool, most people are pretty willing to do that in the pen world. So you can do that if you're so inclined, you want to get a little social. Reading lots of reviews, you know, there's obviously reviews on our site and other places that you can do. You can reach out to people and try like swapping and trading. You might have a pen that somebody else really wants to try. And it's like, hey, let's trade for a week and then we'll send it back and that kind of thing. A little bit of coordination there, a little bit of trust, but it can be done. But, you know, obviously a very practical thing would be to reach out to retailers like us. My team is here to answer questions like that on all the social channels, as well as phone, email, live chat, all these things. So if you have a question, yes, you can't try it, but you can get really good personalized feedback from somebody that has handled a lot of these pens and can give you some pretty decent you know, guidance in terms of what to do. And then, of course, if you're shopping at a retailer, you can, you know, get verify the return policy and try to minimize that if you do need to get a return. You know, it's different if it's like, I need to make sure that it flows perfectly with an exact ink that I'm using. Okay, then you're inking up the pen. A lot of retailers will have a restocking fee if you ink it up because you got to clean it out. You can't sell it as new, these types of things. But if it's a pen and you're just like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like the vanishing point with that grip, you know, because the clip is on the grip, like that might feel weird to me. Well, you can buy that thing, like from us, for example. It's going to be different every retailer, but you can buy that pen. You can try holding it in your hand. As long as you don't ink it up, you know, and you don't like ruin any part of it, you keep all the packaging and everything, you can hold that thing, you know, and get a pretty good dry run of it. and get a good sense of it. And then if you find that it's just not going to work for you, you can send it back, and just for basically the price of shipping. Since it's a preferential thing, we'll give you a full refund on it. So, reach out to your retailer, read the terms and conditions and policies and stuff like that of whatever retail you're buying it, and see what the deal is there. Obviously, if you I really need to make sure that I have a pen that is going to, handle well if I run over it with my car. Well, if you test that and then you go to return it, it's not going to work out so great in terms of full refund. But that could be another option for you to consider, is looking within the policy and see what it is. Let's see here. And then if you've done all that stuff and you're still just really unsure, just try the most popular pens, because generally speaking, the most popular pens are popular for a reason. They tend to be reliable. People tend to like them a lot. So you can start out kind of with those and expand from there. It's going to be a challenge if you've never seen a pen before you buy them, but that's why we're trying to help you as much in advance as possible. I've thought a lot about hey, is there a way? I think about Warby Parker and other companies like that send out things before you buy them. You pick one after you try it out. It's a little bit different for something like eyeglass frames than it is for a pen, because a pen's a functional tool. You'd be surprised the number of people that could potentially ruin it before sending it back if they don't know what they're doing, or they just happen to drop it and they're like, whoops, oh well, sorry, I'll just send it back. So there's a lot of that stuff, the logistics that we would have to consider in a try before you buy situation. Haven't been able to quite figure out the logistics of that one yet, but it's on my mind. I'm thinking about it. Could be something, at least if there was an option like that, that'd be pretty rad. No other retailer that I know has ever tried that either. I think everybody else is kind of in the same boat as me. They're like, yeah, it's a good concept, but I don't know how we would do that profitably. Anyway, in question, I got one from Lisa M on Facebook. It's the strangest thing. My Noodler's burning red was once a brighter red. Now as I head towards the bottom of the bottle, it's much darker and sadly a bit ugly, like dried blood. I'm certain it didn't get another ink mixed with it. What can account for color shifting to dark as it ages? I'm sure this question could spawn some political jokes, but honestly, that's not my intention. Well, I won't go there, Lisa. There's enough of that out there in the world already. So I don't know if this is specific to burning red. Burning red's not a wildly popular ink color, and I haven't really known a lot of people to get to the bottom of a bottle of it. You may be one of the first that I've heard of, at least. That's something to take into consideration. There could be a couple of things going on. I think that, especially with Noodlers, Nathan Tardif really believes in putting as much dye in that bottle as possible to get you the most bang for your buck. So he tends to saturate them pretty heavily. And I think what can happen sometimes is the ink can actually have some of the dye kind of fall out of solution and concentrate a little bit on the bottom, because he does saturate them to the point where it may get oversaturated, and they fills them by hand and stuff like that, so it can vary a little bit bottle to bottle. So it could be that there was more dye kind of at the bottom of the bottle and less at the top. So when you were filling from the top and getting a brighter color. And as you've been working your way down towards the bottom, you're getting a more concentrated form of the dye, which would make the darker red, and sort of explain that a little bit. Now, one way to kind of make sure that doesn't happen is just gently shake your bottle, back and forth, maybe 5 to 10 times before you ink it up. Then you're kind of circulating everything. That's a good whenever you have any shimmering ink or anything like that. But when you have really saturated inks, especially like Noodlers, that can be a good thing too. I know ink shaking is kind of a controversial thing. Some people think you never should. I have never had a problem with it, and I tend to do it with everything because I want the color to be even from one fill to the next. So that's what I always tell everybody, do whatever you want, but that's what I do. So that could be one thing to just kind of put into practice or just keep in mind as you are going about using your other colors. And I found that, especially with reds, the reds tend to be more in the color shifting, ink concentrating, falling out kind of thing. I've seen that with, like peach haze, specifically Noodler, or maybe it's Georgia peach. I've seen that with Dragon's Napalm. And certain other red, I don't know if it's something about just certain red dye components tend to fall out of solution a little bit more maybe. So that's something to keep an eye on. Another explanation could be that some water could have actually evaporated out of the bottle, thus having kind of a similar effect where if the water is evaporating over time, just as you're uncapping it, I don't know your pen filling, system. Or whether you leave the bottle uncapped for a long period of time. But some people they'll go to fill their pen, they won't recap it right away. It'll kind of sit out for a while. and it's not really harmful in the short term, but over a decent period of time, if it's hours and hours and hours that you're leaving your pen uncapped, if you live in a really dry environment, leaving your bottle uncapped, if you live in a really dry environment, the water could be evaporating out of there, leaving all the dye behind, thus concentrating it more, especially as you get down into the bottle, which would also mean it's been happening longer over time. So if you are shaking your ink and you know that you're not leaving it open like that, I don't really have an explanation for you other than, I suspect it's probably one of those two things, unless it's just, sometimes what can happen with certain ink colors, this is more iron gall inks. I don't think there's any of those properties in burning red. But I think, sometimes with iron gall inks, you see oxidation happening. So it could be there's some component in there that's oxidizing a little bit as it's getting exposed. The other thing I'm thinking about is like if there's exposure to sunlight, maybe that can impact it somewhat, but usually that's not going to make it darker. That would make it lighter, because usually sunlight, the UV rays from sunlight are going to break down the dyes and lighten it up. So I don't really know. It's a bit of a mystery, but those are kind of the two suspects that I have. Contamination is also possible, but you said that you don't think that's the case, so I'm going to take your word for it. But I do have a possible solution for you. I didn't just want to leave you hanging and accuse you of a bunch of stuff. I don't exactly know what's caused it with this particular instance, but I think probably most likely your situation is something related to a higher concentration of dye. The nice thing about that is you can dilute it and get that kind of back to its brighter color, I think. So you may want to experiment with this and do it in like a small sample vial. Just try a few milliliters at a time if you've got anything like that handy. But just take a few milliliters out and then try putting some distilled water in it and reconstituting that dye into a larger volume of water. And I think you're going to see that color lighten up, maybe get it back to the original shade. If you're like, I'm going to throw this bottle away, I don't really care, what the heck, you can just do it right in the bottle. And the only thing is if you overshoot it or if that doesn't fix it, then you've just added a bunch of stuff into your bottle. But that is a very popular thing. And in fact, Nathan is like, when I asked him in person, I was like, Nathan, people have asked about like having ink that's less concentrated or with more shading properties or whatever. He looked at me like I was crazy. He was like, just dilute the ink. He's like, that's all you need to do is dilute the ink. He's like, and he was like, I'm not going to sell people a diluted ink with more shading. He's like, because that's not as economical. I mean, everything that he thinks about is maximum value for your money. I mean, everything. So if you ever want to brighten up the color, get a little better shading properties or whatever of your Noodler's ink, all you got to do is dilute it a little bit, and that's going to help get you there. So again, do that in small quantities just as you're experimenting, but that could very well be your unlock in this situation. Cool? All right, last question I have for this week. This is a troubleshooting question that I think will be pretty interesting. I've never actually covered this one, so it'll be saving the best for last on this episode. Tessa M on Facebook says, how do you get a nib out of a pen that will not come out with the Goulet grip? Is the only way for it to come out with a knockout nib punch? And a lot of you might not know what that is, so I'm going to explain a little bit. And I'm going to have my little raised surface since you can't actually see my desk surface. So, knockout nib punch. So I have this handy dandy contraption here, and I better not drop it on my computer because it'll destroy my keyboard. This is called a nib block. This is technically a nib burnishing block. Which is used for if there's like you drop your nib and it bends and you need to kind of smooth it out, you can bend and smooth it and burnish it here with these forms. But that is a whole other level of nib restoration you don't need to worry about. The part I want you to concentrate is here with all the holes, okay? So this is a kind of a combination block. You can actually buy just like nib knockout blocks that are way less expensive because you're not buying a whole big chunk of aluminum. A site that I want to mention to you, I'm not affiliated in any way other than I know Dale Beebe a little bit and had good experiences, and he's pretty important in the pen community. So go check out nibtooling.com. So nibtooling.com. Pentooling.com. Whoops, completely said the wrong thing. Pentooling.com. No affiliation there whatsoever, but probably the best that I'm aware of, at least the best supplier of pen repair and nib repair tools. Okay, so if you are really wanting to get into that world, I mean, the site's a little, it's a little dated, That's okay. Dale's got a lot of really good stuff there. So good materials. He's got some good educational stuff about how to use it, especially if you're into storing vintage pens. Got some very specialized tools that can do some vintage repair stuff. He's also at a lot of pen shows, so you can often find him at a pen show and see some of the stuff in person. Nib pulling tools and knockout blocks and these types of things. So what you're asking about here is, this is a knockout block. Before we get into that though, for example, let's say we want to pull out a pen, pull out a nib. I've got my Eco Classic Sport here. I'm going to use a Goulet grip. This one is not going to be a problem, but basically I use my Goulet grip, which is just a big piece of rubber, and I'm going to grab the nib in the feed from the top and the bottom, not the sides, and you can yank it right out of there. Voila! Pretty straightforward. Now you have your nib in your feed. Set them back in there properly. You can set them back in there without even having to use the grip, and you move on with your life. What can happen sometimes, certain pens, the nib and feed gets really stuck in there. There may be a tighter fit on some pens than others. You might have some old dried ink that's in here, and it's really tough to pull it out. Basically, when it comes to pulling out nibs, most of them are friction fit, like the vast majority, with the exception of very few pens. If you have a hooded nib, you're not going to be able to pull it straight out from the front. You're going to have to go and get it from behind, which is going to look different on every single pen. So when you're talking about a Lamy 2000 or Pilot Vanishing Point or something like that, it's going to be a little different. But the vast majority of pens are going to be, especially if you have a nib and feed arrangement that looks like this one, it's going to be yank it from the front. So usually when it's stuck, the answer is pull harder. Try rocking it back and forth, giving a little bit of a twist as you do it, can tend to like break up any nib or any ink, dry stuff that's on there or anything like that. Soaking it, cleaning it, making sure that that ink is broken down as much as possible before you pull it out. Nibs and feeds are never like glued inside the housing. I've never seen that. You may have a housing that's glued inside the grip. That could happen. But that's basically the situation. So I'll use this pen as an example of, before I get to the nib block and show you that process. There are some pens, for example, like the Jinhao. I have the 750 here. This one is friction fit as well. I've pulled this one out a bunch, so it's nice and easy. Sometimes it's in there pretty good and it's a little tougher to pull out. That's one example of a pen that you may need to do that. The challenge you have with a nib block like this on modern pens, most modern pens have a nib feed arrangement inside a housing. Okay, so for example, the Benu Titan, right? So this is a pretty similar, a pretty straightforward pen design that you'll see. It's got a cartridge converter that you pull out. It has a nib housing that just screws into the pen. Oh gosh, now it's not going to do it. How do you like that? There we go. So it's got a nib housing that just screws into the pen, and the nib and feed are friction fit inside the housing. So that helps to make sure that the housing helps to make sure that the nib and feed are in there. They can make these housings in mass, especially these days. You have a lot of companies like, Schmidt, which they're using Schmidt's, but you'll have Bach, Yovo, have other manufacturers. Some manufacturers make their own nibs. A lot of them are having them made by other manufacturers. So they buy the whole housings like this. They design a pen to fit the threads on the housing, and then they're not having to engineer, because you get into some pretty precise stuff when you're trying to get a nib and a feed to fit inside the actual pen body. You would have much more difficult time engineering that if you had one manufacturer that was making your nib and feed, and then a bunch of other kind of pen companies that were trying to make actual grips to accommodate just the nib and the feed. So they have these housings so that they can have a much more reliable product to sell to other pen companies, the nib companies do. So this is a much more common setup than what you see in vintage pens. Vintage pens, they were basically all making their own nibs, and so they would design pens and the nib and feed would just kind of sit in there. You saw housings far less often. So when you're talking about nib blocks and nib punch outs and stuff like that, really you're talking about vintage pens. So modern stuff, you're not going to be able to use it as much because, for example, if you have a housing like this and you go to use a punch out, here's my little punch out tool, and it goes to fit on here, the punch out tool is not sitting on the back of the nib and the feed, it's sitting on the housing. So if I go to punch this thing out, the housing is threaded inside the grip. I'm using a punch. All I'm doing is putting pressure and like ripping the back of the housing out of the grip of the pen and causing damage. It's not going to help remove the nib and the feed, it's just going to cause problems. So it's not actually going to help me remove that. So you pretty much are relegated to using a grip. Now there is technically, I don't even know if I can show you this very easily. I'm going to push this camera to the limits. So you can see on the back of this feed housing, the punch out tool that I'm going to use has a hole. So it's got a hole in it, and it's made to fit over the post of that feed nib unit, right? So that allows the feed, this is very difficult to show. That allows the feed, ta-da, which has this tiny little post on the end of it, that allows the feed to get all the way up in there and get access to the ink. And this plastic post that's on the back of this, sorry, I'm not trying to flick you off. This plastic post that's on the back of the housing is meant to be a secure place for your converter to be able to fit on, okay? So the converter itself is not fitting onto this tiny, tiny little post that's on the back of the feed, okay? But this feed has a secure place to fit in here. So the challenge you see is if I'm using a punch out tool and I'm trying to punch out here, all I'm doing is putting pressure on the back of that housing. It's not gonna work. Now, theoretically, if I wanted to punch it out and I put pressure right onto the back of this feed here and use that to punch it out from the housing, theoretically I could do that, but you're talking about such a small surface area here, and I'm punching and putting a lot of pressure. If this thing is really jammed in there, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ram whatever that piece of metal is into the back of this feed and probably ruin the back of the feed. So it's not gonna be great for anybody. Technically it can be done. You know, we've had to do that in a pinch sometimes here where it's like we just need to salvage this nib and this feed be darned. We're just gonna get it out of there. And we have, you know, taken like a paper clip or something very thin and metal and use that to kind of punch out the feed from within that tiny little post inside the housing. But it gets rather precarious doing that, and it's not the kind of thing you're gonna wanna do more than once if you don't have to. So that's the situation you get into there. Okay, I'm getting my pen parts mixed up. There we go. So when you're talking about a punch out tool, basically the way it works is if you have a pen that has, does not have a threaded housing, and I use this QOTW as an example because it is one modern example. It has a housing on it, but the housing is actually pressure fit inside the back. So I actually can use it to demonstrate how the punch works. So basically you have your special punch here that's got the hole in the end of it, it's metal. You've got your nib punch block, and you wanna get, it comes with different size holes so that you can get basically the hole that has the largest diameter to where it'll still support the outer edge of the grip, but won't block the housing or the nib or feed or anything like that. And then ideally you'd want to use like a small hammer or something. I'm realizing now I didn't bring a small hammer, so I'm going to improvise and use my stapler. Okay, it's got a rubber bottom to it, so it's going to be pretty safe. Now I haven't tried to hammer it on top of this plastic bucket before, but voila. Okay, that came out pretty easily because I just punched it out before I shot this video to make sure I could actually do it. And then the nib just kind of comes down through the block, and voila. I now have, it's in a housing still, but now it's at least out of the grip. So if I didn't have a housing and it was just a nib and a feed, then I would have punched it through and gotten it out, whereas I wouldn't have been able to grip. So basically you're taking your tool and you're pushing it through the back as opposed to trying to pull it through. That's the concept, but again, most modern pens not gonna work because they are almost always in housings these days. But just in case it's not in a housing and you have an opportunity to punch it out, that's how it works. This nib block thing with the burnishing and all that is expensive. It's like 150 bucks. But you can get through Dale's site, you can get through pen tooling, not nib tooling. He has one that's just like a U-shaped piece of metal with holes in it that is just a knockout block that is like 25 bucks. And then I don't know how much this little doodad is, but it can't be much. So, you know, you theoretically could do it, but it's not the kind of thing you're gonna wanna do like just for one pen. It would really kind of be if you were gonna be restoring and like buying vintage pens and knocking them out and then cleaning them and stuff like that. Especially with vintage pens, a lot of times you end up with ones that like somebody inked up, left in their desk drawer for 20 years, pull it back out, the thing's all caked up with ink, and it's hard to clean it all. You might have to punch out that nib in order to get it out. That's really kind of what this is made for. It's not really made for like regular maintenance. Oh, I want to swap my nib, that kind of thing. Pretty much the grip is going to be the best option for you, which is why we offer it on the site. And if you can't get it with that, maybe it's just not meant to be, or you got to keep trying harder. That's kind of it. Okay, I got to clean up a lot of pen parts today, but that answers all my stuff for Q&A. My question of the week for you this week is, do you find that you tend to use pens of similar length, or do you mix it up? Do you like to use some mini pens, some bigger pens? Just take all your pens and kind of measure them out and be like, hot dang, I never really thought about it, but all my pens are pretty much the same length. Is that even a consideration for you? Maybe you don't care. I don't know. I'd just like to know what you think more about pen length. It's kind of got me thinking this week. Excuse me. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, interact, whatever. We're back here. We're here for next week. Rachel and I are going to be off here in a little bit, and then we'll be through our gauntlet of travel. This has been a very travel-heavy spring for us, so the video schedule has gotten a little kooky, but we're going to be back to our regularly scheduled programming here before too long. Appreciate your patience. Good to be back doing this one. Hope you had a good 250. Thanks so much for watching, and right on.